This is a good opportunity to jump into the Q&A as we're already over for the open dialogue portion. So the way that the Q&A will work, folks, is in this middle aisle here, if you want to come up, it's really important that you stand on this first tape line right here. And then it's also important that if you want to give a setup for your question, like 1 or 2 sentences, that's okay, but it really has to be 1 or 2 sentences, and I even have to be kind of pushy about that, and I even have to hold the mic just to be sure. So, floor is all yours with the first question.
Hi, John. This is my question for you. I have a couple friends on both sides of the aisle. One of them is we can vote the right people into power. We put the right people on state, local, and federal levels. If we do that, we'll be able to take our country back. The other side says, no, we got to crash and burn this thing. We got to start over from scratch. So my question for you is, at what point is it too late?
Well, certainly not now. There is this mindset that I think is very tempting to especially young men, because we sort of like to, like for example, you probably have a relationship with drywall, right? It's like you sort of get mad and you just want that. I think can translate politically as well. It can sort of map where it's like, I'm very frustrated with the way things are going. What if everything just collapsed? It does not make it easier to win when you start losing worse. There are plenty of countries you can look to right now. South Africa, I guess, would maybe be the most obvious example where things get worse for them politically. And I mean, they're having blackouts, they're having riots, but still things are more or less functioning. Total collapse is not something I think that we should aspire to. I think that the solution is much longer. It requires a lot more work, and it requires a lot of patience, and sort of thinking that, if we lose, somehow people will wake up and then we can win. I don't think that's true at all. I mean, look at how things are now. The idea that there's like some sleeper cell remnant of patriots who aren't quite getting what's going on now, who once things reach a certain point, they will wake up and then we can finally take the country back. I don't think that's true. I think there are opportunities right now. And the best thing you can do, other than get involved locally, which you would be surprised at how successful you can be with that, is to cast a vote for Donald J. Trump in November. So I think there is a political solution. I think there's a path forward. And I think the evidence to that is how much opposition this guy has faced. I mean, if things were really going to continue into our managed decline into a third world nation, then we'd be struggling to get excited about the Bush-Haley ticket right now. But we have Donald Trump, and they've tried to stop Trump. By the grace of God, a gust of wind saved Donald Trump, and the golf incident just a few weeks ago. So I think that there's a very real threat that he poses to whatever it is that's going on in this country, which everyone seems to recognize on an intuitive level, but maybe we don't want to get into the specifics of when it comes to, I guess, more polarizing political issues or what have you. But I think it's real, and I think there is a way to make America great again by supporting him.
Hi, thank you both for being here. So my question's for Destiny, and I tried to keep track throughout this debate just because I noticed something. I was kind of curious about it. As far as I could count, you mentioned Kamala Harris's name 6 times in the entire time you were able to speak. Once in your opening statement, which is surprising to me because, as I understand it, you are arguing in the affirmative that she should be the president. If it was the nature of this debate or something that led you not to be able to argue because of that, and you were more so arguing against Trump, I want to open this up to you to ask, why Kamala? I know why not Trump, why you're saying that, but why vote for Kamala? Because I don't think you've really made that argument.
The honest argument is we live in a 2-party system right now, and at the end of the day, you're either going to vote for Trump or you're going to vote for Kamala Harris. You can have not voting for one party, or you can have a positive to vote for another party. These are the way that elections work. Republicans can pretend it's different, but Steve Bannon, when he came onto Trump's campaign, he knew this. I think Bannon had 88 days to go until the election. And when Bannon was brought on, he noticed something, that unlike all of the people that are sycophantically obsessed with Donald Trump, that believe that he's a super popular president, he's not. Donald Trump has never been a popular president. He's just really popular in the Republican Party. That's why when Bannon came on, they did things like the laptop story and everything for Hunter Biden, because they knew that the only way you could actually win the election was to drive the negatives up of the other party, rather than trying to make your own candidate more likable. Nobody on the other side likes Donald Trump. Even Republicans have to begrudgingly accept him at times. I wish that there was more conversation about policy in the United States. To be totally honest, Kamala Harris probably sits either quite a bit or a little bit to the left of me when it comes to economic policy, but Republicans have decided that we're not going to have policy conversations in this country. When Donald Trump won't say what he wants to do for foreign policy because he says it's top secret, when Donald Trump is given policy questions and he has no answer, when you go on to Donald Trump's website and you read the policy stuff and it says things like, we're going to slash inflation by making homes more affordable, and that's it, you don't really get to talk about any policy. There's no policy to talk about. I wish we could have more policy debate and more policy conversation, but I'd basically just look at the 4 years under Biden. I'd look at what the policy policy was there. And I'd say it's probably going to be similar under Harris than compared to the 4 years under Trump, which I think were catastrophic and pushed this nation to the edge. And I'd say I probably don't want to repeat that. And then broadly speaking, I think that's why I support Kamala Harris as president.
Hey, my question is for John. I also just really quickly wanted to say that, like, as a theater kid, I'm very offended and triggered and woke by your comments. But I will also say you probably should try theater. I think you'd really, like, do well on stage. My question's just, I go out canvassing a lot and I talk to a lot of black people, and a lot of them feel like they're not being represented by the Democratic Party too much. So could you try to sell me on why Republicans are good for black people?
I am going to have to reach deep into the bowels of my mind to find my Dinesh D'Souza education. This is like 10 years old at this point. Why are the left the real Nazis again? This is very old school stuff. But it is true, like unironically. I mean, if you look, for example, under Trump, people who are maybe in this room supporting Trump even were agitated by how much Trump was talking about how great he was for black voters. But it is true. I mean, you're looking at real net worth, you're looking at jobs, things like that. I mean, I know recently he got in trouble for saying black jobs, but it is true there are jobs which disproportionately are going towards African Americans, towards blacks, and so those can be black jobs, and I don't think that's a big issue. And he was just better. I mean, income was higher, wealth was higher, crime was lower, black communities were safer up until the riots in the summer of 2020, and I just frankly don't see what the other side has to offer. I mean, that's my side, but if we can even just support that because the opposition is so bad, what do Democrats have to offer black people? Black people have voted in blocks for Democrats for decades. Black communities have gotten less safe, there's less money, less home ownership. I mean, things have obviously not gotten better, yet the rate of voting for the Democrats in the black community still remains very high. And so I sort of almost echo the Trump statement, which I think was in 2016, which got him in trouble, where he's like, what do you have to lose? I mean, if things clearly are not going well now, why would you not try to maybe experiment with what the opposition has to offer? And even when they didn't vote for him, by majority, by far in 2016, you still look at the way black America was doing in 2016 through 2020 versus how they've been doing for the last 4 years, and it's measurably better, and it's not even close.
Are we allowed to respond to questions too, if they weren't for us explicitly?
I can give the question asker a quick response if you'd like, but Destiny, I hate to say it, but I have to keep the rebuttals to an absolute minimum, even among the audience. But I want to give you a chance if you do have a rejoinder. Go ahead.
Not quite convinced yet, but I'll look into what you're saying.
I think that there's a lot of hesitancy among minorities to support Republicans because there is a very sophisticated media apparatus which goes to convince everybody that racism is like very prevalent on the Republican side. Therefore, if we vote for racism, we're going to have that come back to bite us. But I mean, I don't see the fruits of that anywhere. I've never seen anything like a policy, for example, which can demonstrate the viability of that. So.
Just remember, audience guy, whatever you sound like, if you're a black person asking the question, right? He wants to see less of your kind of people in this country when John Doyle is answering this question. If somebody shows the border looking like you, he doesn't want people that look like you to come to this country, just as a heads up.
That's not true because when I referenced the immigration policy, black Americans were already here. I'm talking about Indians and Chinese and all these other people, so.
I have to move us to the next
by the way,
question.
I love nobody. I'm literally a black person expert, which my audience will know. Nobody has more love and respect for black America than myself.
Just to keep this in the Q&A.
Knowing all the slurs doesn't make you a black person expert.
We're all right. Just so we can hear the next question, folks.
For John, in 2016, you mentioned one of Trump's greatest hits when he took Jeb Bush to account for his flipping his opinion on the Iraq War. And you mentioned a little bit about Trump's foreign policy in terms of what it might look like for Ukraine. What is your understanding about his, maybe what a Trump presidency in 2024 might look like for Israel, particularly with his relationship with Miriam Adelson?
Yeah, I think that, the Adelsons, for example, gave him, I think, $100 million or something in 2016. I think now the widow is going to give him $120 million. And to me, I don't think that there's actually, I had to hear this in 2016 as well. There were a lot of alt-right guys at the time who were looking at the relationship between Trump and the Adelsons, and they were calling him just like they are now, Zion Don. They're saying that he's just going to be an Israeli puppet. And you look at how that actually played out. By the way, calling him a Zionist is the way that they would call George Bush a Zionist or Barack Obama, like pretending that's all the same thing. You look at how that played out. out and, okay, he relocated an embassy, and then we have a photograph taken at a wall, which now I have to see is like the reason why he's supposedly such a sellout. You look at what's going on right now in the Middle East. I understand as we speak, Israel is launching an invasion, I suppose, a ground invasion into Lebanon. But we're hearing that there's going to be World War III. We've been hearing that with Iran forever. It's never metastasized. I don't think that it will. And I don't think that Trump is beholden to these interests the way that people like to think that he is. I think Trump looks at everything through the lens of the art of the deal. And if people are willing to give him $100 million instead of the other guy, he's willing to say, yeah, and what leverage do they really have? I mean, okay, give them the money. Now what? Israel wants sovereignty over the West Bank. How does that affect me as an American patriot? I mean, you could say maybe it'll escalate tensions in the Middle East. As Destiny mentioned, we killed like their top guy and they didn't do anything. They rose the flag. They said, we're going to get you, America. They didn't do anything. So I'm not worried about it. And yeah, if they want to write Trump a check for $100 million to make it easier for him to get elected, I don't see the obvious downsides to that, which weren't iterated in 2016 as like guarantees, things that were going to happen. So I just don't think it's an issue, to be honest. And by the way, I have thought about that quite a lot online. I put my reputation behind that. If Trump ends up going to war with the Middle East on behalf of Israel, I'll be the first one to get up and say, I was wrong. But I noticed the people who are doing the opposite, saying that Trump is totally a slave to the Israel lobby. They kept their mouths shut and never apologized for saying those things about the man who's now taken a bullet for them. So I will put my reputation behind that, but I noticed that Trump's detractors will not do the same.
Just to be clear, Trump didn't take the bullet. He passed it off to the dude behind him. So I don't know where this
Which you
idea of
joked
him taking
about,
the
by
bullet
the way.
comes
You
from.
thought that was like the funniest thing ever. This guy cares so much about democratic institutions, but when like an official presidential candidate is shot at and then the guy behind him gets killed, he makes jokes about it on Twitter.
I was laughing at you saying he took the bullet. He clearly didn't take it. He passed it along.
He was injured. He was
have
hit
to
by the
move
bullet.
forward.
What happened to his ear?
Gentlemen,
He got hit by the Secret Service
I
guy
hate
that
to do
ran
this,
into him.
but
I
we
don't
have
think
to
he
move
got shot
forward.
at all.
Hi, John. I'm Ryan. I'm a startup engineer, a scout of 12 years, and I align strongly with your strongest values. Earlier, you mentioned you were surprised to see immigrants in Ohio because they were apples and oranges with the people there. As the son of immigrants, I'm curious about how you feel about families like mine standing proudly shoulder to shoulder with the men of Ohio, the good men of Ohio.
I have no issue with immigrants. If Destiny will put me to a position where he's like, John Doyle wants no immigration, I'm going to be like, so true. But it's not so much immigration that's the issue, it's where the immigrants are coming from. And do you mind if I ask where your family's from? Cuba. Yeah, so
No,
I mean,
tell him your position before he answers. Which immigrants don't you want coming here?
Cuban Americans are historically one of the most conservative demographics in the country. So do I have an issue with Cuban Americans simply because they are from Cuba? No, I have an issue with people who manifestly are not able to assimilate into American culture. And you look at almost any other ethnic group in the country, aside from Cubans and some African
Name
ethnicities
them. Which
and rare
ones?
examples, they are not voting for the country which
Cuban
wants
isn't
to
an ethnic
conserve
group.
the-
That's a nationality.
They are not voting for
Stephen.
the party which wants to conserve the country. They are block voting for Democrats because they want to make America more like the countries from which they came, which is to say wealth redistribution, socialism, inflation, crime, everything like that, because they are not able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps like other groups are, for example. And so I have no issue with that.
Thank you, John, especially because your clip compilation will help me convert the rest of my family to liberals. I appreciate it.
Right.
So we've seen quite an escalation in the Middle East with Israel attacking Hezbollah. How does either candidate plan to try to stop Israel from dragging us into World War III with Iran, either through like supporting arms deals to Israel, or just actually having a ceasefire deal that Netanyahu's not just going to reject after Hamas or Hezbollah accepts it?
I don't think that the right-wing Israelis have nearly the leverage that they think they do. I mean, I understand that there are donors in this country who will give money to Trump's campaign, but Netanyahu politically is not very popular right now. I mean, he is wrestling to maintain control of his leadership as well in Israel, and I think that he feels as though if the war comes to an end, or if he takes his foot off the gas, so to speak, he may be in trouble politically speaking, and so he certainly has an incentive to escalate. But I think Trump, as he said, he remembers that Netanyahu betrayed him and immediately called and congratulated Joe Biden on winning the presidency. And Trump even said, I think in a leaked audio recording or a leaked, from one of the staffers that he said, like, yeah, Netanyahu betrayed me, F him. So he clearly remembers that. And even, when Netanyahu came to visit, for example, there was clear tension between the two. Trump was talking about the war in a way that Netanyahu was not exactly a fan of. The way that he did also with Zelensky, saying basically he's going to approach it as a businessman and not, be beholden to these interests necessarily. So I think the question of World War III is not only the question of how we operate on our end, I think it's also what threat is actually posed. I think that largely Obviously, the Middle East threat is a paper tiger. I think that there are a lot of talk and not a lot of action, and every time that they've said that they're definitely going to do something this time, it just hasn't actually been what's happened. And so I think that there are more pressing issues that we should worry about as Americans that affect us domestically. And yeah, I simply don't think that Trump views his job as commander-in-chief to be beholden to foreign interests. I think that, again, in 2016 through 2020, when he was in office, he really didn't do that so much with the Israelis besides moving an embassy, taking a photo at a wall. But he wasn't in there like George Bush, for example, like willing to put boots on the ground to destabilize the Middle East. He repudiated that, and he took control of the party and realigned the position so that we all have to be against that. Whereas, as I mentioned earlier, prior to Trump, your level of republicanism was measured by how willingly and vocally in support of those wars you are. So I think that it's just a completely different ballgame now.
Destiny, do you have an answer to the question?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I went over to Israel for 2 weeks, and after talking to a lot of Palestinians on the ground there, I would say that Donald Trump makes me really nervous when it comes to Israel, because I've never seen a more Zaghi type president. It makes me really worry that I think Donald Trump ordered that hit on Soleimani. He was the leader of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is responsible for a lot of the international meddling that goes along inside of Israel. He supported Hezbollah, he supported the Houthis, he supported Hamas. And I kind of wonder if Donald Trump only ordered that assassination because of the $100 million that Adelson and other AIPAC donors sent to his campaign. I know Donald Trump is on record saying publicly that he is Israel's strongest supporter. I know that Donald Trump created a position in the White House and sent his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to the Middle East to negotiate peace deals for Israel. I don't know why the United States is risking itself to make peace agreements for Israel, for other countries between them and Israel. And then I know that we talk about moving the embassy and recognizing. I think it was like America was like one of 3 countries to do that. I thought that was really weird. And along with that, I think Trump was also willing to go along with Netanyahu when Netanyahu was talking about cutting UNRWA funding and everything to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And I don't think that Donald Trump did anything to hold Israel accountable for any of its behavior in the Middle East. So I think one of the things that I'm the most worried about when it comes to Donald Trump and foreign policy is he definitely comes off as kind of like an Israeli Jewish puppet. And that just makes me really nervous, I think. I'd rather have somebody like Kamala Harris, who seems to be really critical of Israel and their foreign policy, and seems to be a lot less bought and paid for by, people of the Torah.
All right, this question's for John. Oh, thank you. All right, this question's for John. I listened to your content for the first time while I was driving over here, and I had a bunch of questions listening to it. But then you said something earlier on in the debate. Could you repeat the number you said of how much of Joe Biden and Kamala's cabinet has stepped down so far?
Kamala Harris had like a turnover rate for her staff that was 92%, I believe.
92%. Now, that was for Kamala or the Biden administration?
The one running for president.
So the Biden administration?
No, for Kamala Harris specifically, because we're talking about whether she has leadership capabilities. Her staff, as her vice presidential staff, had a 92% turnover rate.
Okay. And when you compare that to a 98% turnover rate for Donald Trump, including 13 members of a cabinet, what do you have to say about that?
Again, it's a completely different assignment. Donald Trump is going to...
okay. Wait. Hold on.
Yeah.
You can't just say, oh, it's different.
I do want to give him a chance to answer the question.
It absolutely is. What a Democrat administration is looking to do is different from what a nationalist administration is looking to do. If you're looking to hire from the swamp to fill a nationalist administration, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do that. You're going to be working with neocons, career politicians who are completely misaligned with that agenda, and they're not going to want to have their reputation stained by working for what is viewed to be an irritant by the Republican establishment. If you're Kamala Harris, you're the establishment. You have the blessing of the establishment. The DNC staged literally a coup to put you in as opposed to Joe Biden. Everything she wants to do is more or less an extension of the same political orthodoxies we've had in this country for 60 years. So to me, looking at the situation, I don't understand why anybody would want to not get to say, I worked for Vice President Harris, other than she's simply like a completely unlikable person, which makes sense too, because you hear leaks about her breaking down. She's always drunk. She has to LARP these dinners prior to meeting with diplomats because she's a wreck. She's like always on Adderall, and she just seems to be a complete mess. And so, yeah, I don't view it the same way. I would challenge you to not view it as simply, oh, Democrats this, but Republicans this. I think there's more at play going on. I think there's another axiom for how we have to view our political establishment, which is simply the establishment versus the patriots, versus nationalists, people who want to put America first, versus people who want to basically manage the decline of our country until everybody else in the world gets to pick at the bones of our civilization.
And then just real quick, the establishment
Yes.
is not the New York City billionaire, right?
Sorry?
So the New York City billionaire isn't part of the establishment?
I don't think the establishment's necessarily
Yeah, that's what I thought.
geographic, you know. It doesn't have to be. It's, you know, what do they call it? The cathedral, right? So.
Are we
John,
talking about Kamala Harris' staff turnover? What staff are we talking about here?
Kamala's White House staff had like a 92% turnover rate.
Why would we compare Kamala Harris's staff of the Office of the Vice Presidency to somebody's cabinet?
Because she's never been the president, and so if we are trying to find a metric by which to predict her leadership capabilities, the people who are working with her every day, I think, is a worthwhile metric to explore.
Do you even know the responsibilities that the Office of the Vice Presidency has? Why would we compare the people that are working as staffers as part of that small office, as part of the executive branch, to the cabinet, the top level people for your offices and departments?
If she can't bring people on to like stay with her and like write policy and little debate quips or whatever, I don't think that she would be able to keep people on in a cabinet, let alone anybody of quality who would actually do things that benefit us, as opposed to what they have done, which is make us poorer, less safe, and more of a playground for the rest of the world, which is like literally what has happened and which you have not addressed.
So if Donald Trump can't maintain his personal relationships with lawyers or his staff, and he's losing all of his businesses, and he wasn't able to maintain his cabinet, what faith do we have that Donald Trump can hold on to cabinet members of the future?
I'll give you a chance to respond, John, and then we got to go to the next question.
Because I am aware of what is happening mechanically with Trump's next administration, and that inspires confidence.
It's a non-answer. It doesn't mean anything.
We'll go to the next question.
John, I wanted to confirm before I ask, are you Catholic?
Yes.
So you talk a lot about assimilation. People from the wrong countries can't really come here to assimilate into our culture.
Sure.
But Catholics were widely rejected for a long time, so I was wondering how you kind of justify those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Catholic. I believe in Catholic theology, but I don't necessarily mean or think that that means that we have to open the world to anybody who's Catholic. I mean, Haiti, for example, I keep mentioning, is 52% Catholic. That's more than twice as Catholic as America is. I think that the biggest challenge to Christian anthropology is that a lot of people who claim to be Christians or to be Catholics are not viewing that in the same way that European Christians view it. And so I don't think it's enough to say these people can come into the country because they are Catholic, like a lot of people in Latin America, for example, because if you look at how they vote, how they express their religious values politically, they are still voting overwhelmingly for Democrats, which are a party that literally celebrates a repudiation of those values. I mean, at the DNC, they had a truck that was giving out circumcisions and like birth control and all sorts of things like that, which if you're a Catholic, I mean, you cannot support that in any capacity. But for some reason, these demographics which are coming here from these countries which are supposedly so Catholic are more in alignment with the Democrat Party than they are with the Republican Party. I think it's something like 51% of white Catholics are supporting Trump, 61% of Hispanic Catholics are supporting Harris. Someone's wrong there. Someone is directionally incorrect there. And so I don't view it to say, you know, you can't come into the country because it's just, I see it for what it is. It's not necessarily a religious thing, I don't think. It's more of how that actually manifests with what we see and what's going on. And I think there have been plenty of popes and saints who have expressed similar sentiments to my own.
Wait, hold on. If Catholicism is the important part here, wouldn't the Pope being pro-immigrant, the Pope who's made statements saying that we need to accept migrants more, wouldn't this be something as a Catholic that's probably the most important thing for you to accept in your life as well?
No, I mean, if you want me to Pope-splain, we can Pope-splain, but I don't think that's true.
Okay, that's fine if you want to Pope splain.
Because he's made statements,
then, right? Because the Pope is the head of the Catholic Church, and if you want to betray or if you want to fight against any statements on morality or faith, of which the Pope in the Catholic teachings has infallibility when he speaks on matters of faith, right? You know this, yes, of faith or morality.
Yes, the Pope
how could you possibly call yourself a Catholic?
Because the Pope will say one day that we should, not turn away the poor and we should take care of them. Then he will say other days, countries can have borders, they can enforce immigration policies. It simply depends on which statement of his you want to take, depending upon which day. So I don't think that my view on immigration is misaligned with the church teaching or the teaching from Pope Francis.
That's pretty heretical to me. I don't know.
I was more concerned with like Catholics that are already here renouncing their faith to become more like Protestant America that was founded. You talked about going back to America's roots.
Yeah.
So renouncing Catholics that are already here, renouncing their faith.
I don't renounce Catholics who are here.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks guys for deciding to hold this debate at the very best of the Big Ten campuses. My question is addressed to both of you. Given the significant conflicts happening across the globe, foreign policy wonks are worried that China is going to inevitably invade Taiwan. And if this does end up happening, what makes your respective candidates best equipped to handle this conflict?
I went first. I thought that we were going to segue. Tell me what to do.
Who's going first?
We'll start with John.
Okay. I simply don't think that if Trump is in office, that's a threat that is existing to the extent that it does now when Biden's in office. I think that there have been foreign policy failures under the Biden administration, which essentially put up a flag letting other countries know that we are in a state of relative weakness and they can act more in accordance with their interests because they don't have to worry about America stepping up to the plate to defend their allies the way that they would under a Trump administration, for example. I mean, you look at what's going on in Israel, look at what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. I mean, you could see something maybe pop off, probably not within this timeline because we're like, what, a month out from the election, but I don't think that China would try to do something like that under a Trump presidency. I just simply don't.
I mean, if you look at the foreign policy disposition of this country right now, I think that somebody like Donald Trump is your greatest hope if you're China. Donald Trump has no ability to mobilize the United States to have any kind of coherent foreign policy vision because I think Donald Trump lacks an overall vision for America. I think when you look at the broad picture between Harris and Trump, and I'll speak a bit abstractly, since that's the only thing the conservative has done in this debate, on an abstract level, the problem with Trump is that he doesn't really have a vision for the United States because he has no understanding of history, he has no understanding of geopolitics, he has no understanding of the larger structures at play, meaning he doesn't know why America is the foreign policy leader or where American hegemonic dominance comes from. He doesn't know what NATO is or what it's for. He thinks there's probably a NATO army that everybody pays money towards that America was getting ripped off for. That's the extent he knows about it. And Donald Trump doesn't see where America fits in internationally into the world order, that America should be maintaining peace and stability across especially Europe, if not other parts of the world. So when Donald Trump comes into office, we get these empty platitudes again, like, oh, well, under Donald Trump, these things would never happen. Which things? Because Bashar al-Assad continued to gas his citizens. That's why Trump bombed the airport. Iran attacked Saudi Arabia. That's why Trump went after Soleimani. Russia remained in Crimea. They didn't retreat at all there. They continued to fund the civil war in the Donbass. So this idea that people wouldn't do things under Donald Trump is just nonsense. It just shows that you either don't know history, you don't know the history of 2016 to 2020, or you're more likely you're being malicious and you're just lying and trying to present something in a disingenuous way to try to run away from all of Trump's failures. I would much rather have somebody with a coherent vision for where America sits at in the world, and I think everybody else would fear and respect this more, rather than Donald Trump that comes off like a schizophrenic chihuahua who is only nice to people that pet him last.
Thank you.
So my question is for Stephen and maybe John as well, because I hope he'd be against foreign interference. Given recent controversy around certain figures on the right, like Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, and possibly more to soon be uncovered, receiving Russian money for their coverage, I wanted to ask, are there any reforms you would support to stem anti-American influence, foreign or otherwise?
So I'll go from less extreme to more extreme. I think the least extreme that I think should be proposed to Congress that I think people should genuinely support is if you are any major media player, whether you're alternative media or mainstream media, you should have to disclose who your funding sources are from. Whether that means to the federal government or some third-party organization or even publicly, I don't know what that looks like, but there has to be some sort of disclosure going on, I think. I think that's number one. For a more extreme version, I think that any large social media account that is reporting on or commentating on domestic politics in the United States, that account should be unmasked, or at the very least, we should know the nationality of that account. I think that every single American citizen has a compelling interest to know. I think it would be very interesting to see if, say, the top 10 Democrat accounts, you found out that 9 of them were Chinese, or if the top 10 conservative media accounts, you found out that 9 of them were Russian. I think that people would want to know that. I think it would benefit all of us, and I think it would do a greater service to the concept of freedom of speech and open discourse and open dialogue, rather than having a bunch of people operating under these anonymous masks, taking money from foreign dictators, and trying to screw with our media environment in order to push forth, essentially the destruction of this country.
I would agree with a lot of that. I would not agree with any measure that seeks to reduce the availability of anonymous accounts to people on the internet. I think that Twitter is the only place where free speech really exists right now on the internet, and there's certainly a lot of very, very influential Twitter accounts who've done a lot to move the conversation politically, especially on the right. And so I would not support any measure that seeks to unmask them, because these people have jobs and families, and as we've seen, when they dox people, they arrest them for memes such as Ricky Vaughn. You have instances where these things can get pretty ugly pretty quickly. So I wouldn't support that. I also would maybe just add an asterisk. I don't really like the idea of thinking that foreign money in politics is like the worst thing ever. Not because I support foreign money in politics, but because I don't want people to become under the impression that that is the problem in itself. That there's not a lot of American money that funnels through this country, which is not itself problematic and acting against the interests of American people, because there's plenty of that. So I don't think it's enough to say foreign money is bad. You have to sort of, I think, go a little bit further and say any money that acts against the interests of the American people is bad and should be punished.
If you're opposed to the doxing, does that mean you disavow Libs of TikTok? Because that's an account that frequently and regularly doxes people that have political views that they disagree with?
Libs of TikTok? If I disavow them? No, I don't disavow them.
Okay, so then you don't care about doxing. That was a total lie.
No, they dox.
When you say that X is an open platform for freedom of speech, what do you feel about the J.D. Vance dossier that has been stripped from...
The one that had his social
without
security
a
number?
liberal head?
And I don't support disavowing Libs of TikTok because they dox evil people who are going after exactly the kind of people who I'm speaking about. So it's a completely different
There's that
thing.
good fascist authoritarian speech. That's what I like. As long as they're evil people, there are no bad tactics, only bad targets.
Yes, these are people who want to mutilate the genitals of children. These are bad people. They have to go.
Check one. Let's see. We'll just have to speak. There it goes. Okay. Do you have a quick rebuttal?
No, I think both answers spoke for themselves.
Thank you very much. And then this is actually going to be our last question that we can take.
Hi, I have a question for John Doyle. Previously stated that many immigrants that came out from 1960 were from countries who are culturally incompatible with the United States. Both my roommates in Penn State are actually first-generation immigrants, one of which is from Trinidad and Tobago, the other which is from Nigeria, who was actually personally subject to the Trump Muslim ban in 2016. Both of these men are graduating in the springtime and will be serving in the U.S. Army after they finish their ROTC vows. So these two Americans, because they're both American citizens, are they any less American than you, John Doyle, despite their vow to fight and die for this country?
Well, it's a great question. I think I would first say that we don't make policy based on the exception. We should make it, when we do make it, based on what tends to happen. And your friends are obviously exceptions, but if we let in, say, 1 million people from their respective countries of origin, you would not see that same result. And so I don't think it's a question of whether or not they are just as American as I am, because if they're expressing similar sentiments, I mean, for all intents and purposes, the way that you would, I guess, measure our patriotism or something would more or less be equal. The problem is, when you open up the gates to people from those countries, you don't see the same thing. So am I more American than your friends because they just got here and my ancestors have been here since 1701? I could see an argument for that, but I'm a nice guy, so I like to be inclusive. However, since they're willing to, sacrifice for this country, maybe we would make an exception. But again, we don't like to make exceptions. We want to go based on what tends to happen. And what tends to happen is that when you allow for demographics who are coming from countries that are more alien to the United States, they tend to express their political sentiment in ways which are disadvantageous to Native Americans, to people who built this country, and I can't support that as a patriot.
Is there a single white European country whose immigrants vote conservatively?
Repeat that?
Is there a single white European country whose immigrants come over here and vote for conservatives? Just one?
Not by majority, but if you still look at...
So that means that you would be opposed to all immigrants?
Sure. I'm saying that, like I said earlier, if you're looking at data of immigrant...
What you said earlier was you don't want anybody coming over. You don't want to talk about the exception. You want to talk about the rule. And the rule is what we have to look at what people do in the aggregate. And statistically speaking, because you keep making this like white person reference, which is by the way, a very American. I don't know what you'd say, race thing to do for people that don't have clear ancestry because they're just American, is you have this weird fascination with white Europeans like they would come over here and vote conservatives. I know a lot of people from France, from Sweden, from Norway. You think these people come to the United States? They're the whitest motherfuckers in the world. Do you think these people are coming to the United States and voting for Trump? No, and you just admitted it. So you would ban all immigrants because there's no immigrant group, except for Cubans, I guess, unfortunately for you, I guess, that actually come over here and vote for the horrible party that you're a part of. So why not just say I want to ban all immigration?
Right. I mean, as I've said tonight, and as I've said for 5 years, I don't support immigration. I want an immigration moratorium. When we're talking about historical immigration trends, the demographics which have become more assimilated in the sense that they express their political desires by voting for the party which wants to conserve America are groups that have deeper roots in this country. Germans, Scots-Irish, groups like that, WASPs. These are groups which express what they want the future to look like by aligning themselves more in accordance with the party which seeks to conserve it. And these other groups which, they come to America in 2024 as a Nord. I don't expect them necessarily to hop on the Trump train, but if you're talking about historical immigration patterns, that is definitely true.
I can give you a quick rebuttal.
How can you say I don't understand how you can say we want to conserve America when you want to go back to other times that you're just arbitrarily choosing. Like when you say, for instance, you say, well, the Irish have a deep history in America. Irish and Italians, when they came over through Ellis Island, didn't have as deep of a history in the United States. In fact, they formed a lot of ghettos and they formed a lot of in-groups, and a lot of people that were native in the United States didn't like those people either. So where are you drawing the line at when you talk about conserving America?
I want to give John a response, and then I go to the next question.
Irish and Italians have assimilated into this country. The only thing that would differentiate them would be maybe a St. Patrick's Day celebration or a pasta night, but if you look at how they manifest themselves, they are more or less assimilated without meaningful difference. Other groups don't exactly express that, even if they've been here for 2 or 3 generations, like you see with Chinamen. So.
All right,
Wait,
I'm
can
going
I
to give
ask
you
one
a
more
quick.
question?
I hate to do
Who do you
this,
think had a more extensive? Well, just one quick question for him. Who do you think had a more extensive operation in the United States, MS-13 or the Mafia?
What was it? Who has more roots in the United States?
Who had a more extensive criminal enterprise operation in the United States, MS-13 or the Mafia?
The Mafia existed a long time. MS-13 has only been a problem in this country for the last 10, 15, 20 years. So I don't think that you can equate that, especially if we're talking about a 2024 presidential election.
I want to give you a quick rebuttal.
All right, I just want to say that I'm from Erie County. It's a county known for having a high asylum seeker population. For example, my grandparents lived next to Syrian refugees who were personally tortured by the Assad regime. And when I speak to these people who've immigrated to America and they sing its praises, they have personally made me more prouder to be American than you have, John Doyle.
Do want to remind you folks, we are looking for questions rather than we're looking for questions more than statements. Next gentleman.
Hello. Oh, that guy's really proud of himself. I'd just like to say, I'd like to ask a question to specifically John Doyle first. So I heard you say something about, theater-occupied government earlier.
True.
Could you maybe elaborate on that?
It's just there's a joke on the internet, and it's just a joke. It's obviously not real, where people throw around this term ZOG, Zionist-occupied government, which is a way of describing the way our government functions. I amended that to theater kid-occupied government because I think it's a more accurate way of sort of assessing the type of person who works in government, who works in D.C. And I think that's true. I think I can stand by that. It's essentially to say the type of person who gets involved in politics nowadays, working in D.C. as a staffer, as a policymaker, or whatever, these tend to be people who are very sort of interested in whatever status working in DC can offer to them. They themselves are not necessarily exceptional and accomplished. These are people who strive to become policymakers, who work in DC. They will starve them. I mean, if anyone here knows people working in DC with these kinds of jobs, they're not making very much money, they don't eat very well, and they're pretty much miserable, very anxious all the time, but they enjoy working in DC because they like being able to go back and report something home for Thanksgiving. And so I think that that is a focus of getting involved in politics that is not necessarily to make meaningful change, but rather because they simply enjoy the feeling that it brings them. Sort of like someone who is performing like a theater kid, for example, and you look to when they make their little TikToks and they're dancing around, it reminds one of the experience in high school that maybe we have had with theater kids. And so I sort of saw it and could not unsee it, and I still think that that's a pretty accurate way to describe those kinds of people.
Yeah, so you're basically describing like a government full of like SGA kids, pretty much.
SGA kids?
Yeah, like Student Government Association.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are the kids, they wear the suits to school, like the Model UN, debate bro kinds of kids, and it's like people who tend to get involved in politics, I think, to make change will do it because it's the right thing to do, not because they want to LARP and dress up and wear a suit to school and get in debates with their teacher about, nerdy policy things like that. So
just because we want to squeeze as many more questions, unless you got a rebuttal.
Oh, no. Do I have time to make another question or just like a small one?
I want to move to as many people as possible.
That's okay.
I'm
That's
sorry to do
okay.
that to you.
That's okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay. So when you were up, you were saying things that like describe a great leader, right? And you were talking about things like the ability for Trump to take over the Republican Party, right?
Sure.
And what would make him even better is if he was like able to step on the Democrats and pass things through. Well, despite him having both houses and, like you said, control the Republican Party, he wasn't able to get things done. So then now my question is, right? When you are so willing, right, for him to use authoritarian-like executive actions, and willing to ignore things like 34 felonies and an indictment for January 6th, do you see how it could be like you're in favor of more of a Haitian president than an American president as a resident Haitian?
Are you implying that residents from Haiti are more likely to be criminal than American residents?
Oh, well, if you look at the history of Haiti, I said Haitian president. one who acts like a
corrupt and
president
more
but is
authoritarian.
actually just an authoritarian?
Right. Well, I don't know. I think that people use the word authoritarian to mean something that's like scary. George Bush, Barack Obama, any of these guys could be argued to be authoritarian. Donald Trump using constitutionally permitted actions to advance his legislative agenda, I don't think is necessarily like authoritarian bad guy kinds of behavior. And yeah, I do think that he's fundamentally in a better position to govern as president than he was 4 years ago, because from day one you had Paul Ryan's Congress that was acting to impede everything he did. You had John McCain, who famously withheld his vote so that Obamacare could not be repealed. You had all these remnants of the Republican establishment who would rather act in ways that they supposedly were supposed to not do, that they were professing support of, if it meant kneecapping Donald Trump's success. Now these people are absent. You look at who was not at the RNC: Paul Ryan, Mike Pence, former Speaker McCarthy. These people were absent from the RNC because they understand that this is not a party that is going to house them anymore. This is a party that is becoming slowly but surely a party that can actually reflect the will of its voters. And so yeah, I have complete confidence in Trump's ability to do that in 2024.
So then I would then ask, would there be any willingness to work with the other side, or do you believe it's just going to be violence? If so, how do you plan to remedy the situation? How do you plan to work with the other side if you don't believe in working with the other side?
I don't think that the issues which we support are actually issues which the other side disagrees with. For example, until Donald Trump, there were a lot of issues that were famously left-wing issues. Things like being anti-war was famously a left-wing issue. Things like protectionism was actually more of a left-wing thing because you had Republicans who wanted total free trade because it was supposed to lower the price of orange juice by 30 cents or something like that. Donald Trump managed to actually realign the party such that now the Republican Party is the party of not wanting to get involved in foreign conflicts, of wanting things like bringing back manufacturing to this country, to this state specifically. And so I don't think that Democrats actually are opposed to this in the way that they think they are. If you look at the issues which tend to pull higher for Democrats for this election, it's more abstract issues, like apparently Republicans are so focused on, issues like democracy, issues like climate change, things like that, which are not, frankly, what people are thinking about when they're at the grocery store. And so I certainly have no intention of not working with the other side. My experience as a Republican, and I think that most Republicans can corroborate this, is that it's actually the opposite, where we are told that if we are not willing to go along with things, if we are not willing to limit ourselves to staying to the left of John McCain, then we are somehow threats to democracy and we are going to end America, which Donald Trump was in office for 4 years. Everything was more or less fine. So I'm not worried about that. I don't think it would ever be violent.
We'll jump to the next one.
Wait, am I allowed to answer part of the question?
No.
First of all,
My
authoritarian
name is
not
John, and I have a
one.
question for Stephen. It's the really only question that should be asked at an event like this, and this is gonna seem like a troll, but it's not. I just can't believe that it's true, so correct me if it's not, that you sat in a room or a corner of a room, very much like the one you're sitting in now, and just watched many other men plow the ever-living fuck out of your wife. Is that true?
All right, get it. All right, move over. We want to keep it on task. So we're gonna jump to the next
Do you think for
gentleman.
guys like that, do you think
So-
that they come before they come up and ask a question, or do you think he's edging himself until he gets it all out?
We're ready for your question.
Sorry. This is a question on behalf of a friend for both of you. In the last couple of months, there have been 2 assassination attempts on Trump with guns. There was a school shooting recently as well, so gun violence issues seem to prop up pretty frequently. Do you guys think there's a gun violence problem in this country? And if so, what policies would you like to see implemented under the administrations you favor?
I absolutely think that's the case. I think that every time you see one of these instances, whether it's assassination attempts or whether they are shootings at schools, mass acts of violence, you notice the FBI always has these people on their radar. And for some reason, there's a failure to execute, making sure that these people are not being able to actually carry out these acts. So I think that there's something odd going on there. And I think that if you actually wanted to solve gun violence, you would have an FBI that is doing its job properly, which it could. It just simply chooses not to follow up on these things for whatever reason. And I think that you would enforce laws in inner cities where virtually all of the gun violence happens in the day-to-day level. I mean, you see these isolated instances where you have individuals going into public places or attempting to assassinate future presidents, and you look at that and you're like, okay, there's a gun violence problem. True, but in terms of the vast majority of it, that is happening in the inner cities between largely gangs who are engaging in different types of warfare amongst themselves, and I think that that needs to be cracked down on if you actually wanted to reduce those numbers meaningfully. Any of the policies that I've seen proposed to stop these isolated lone wolf kinds of incidents more or less don't address, I think, the real problem, which is that for some reason law enforcement understands these people are problems, they are monitoring them, and then for whatever reason nothing is done, and they end up going through and carrying out these acts. And so I think that that's where that's coming from.
No, but I was also curious as to what Destiny would have to say, since he's a liberal gun owner. So I thought that would be an interesting perspective.
I think that guns, I think there are issues with guns insofar as like gang violence or certain types of violence in inner cities are concerned, and I think they also expedite people who want to kill themselves. I don't think that they're as big a problem as people make them out to be. I don't like that the Democratic Party makes it a central part of their platform. There are certain types of things that I think I'd be okay with, like possibly more expansive background checks. I think that closing private sale loopholes I think is good. Part of I think what Biden has already done in terms of the private sale loophole stuff, or at least the I think the boyfriend gun loophole or whatever. But guns aren't, it's not a huge issue for me, and I think it's a big political loser when the party deals with it. It's like abortion for Republicans. I just think it's a really divisive topic. That being said, again, something that was said earlier I think is funny. When you talk about an authoritarianism that wants to centralize power in themselves, especially in the executive. There's a reason why we have 3 branches of government. For people that actually give a fuck about this country, I would recommend Federalist Paper number 51. It's a really good explanation, a breakdown of why we have checks and balances, why we have 3 different branches of government, and why you wouldn't want somebody like Donald Trump running the entire thing. And I think it's also strange in terms of how Republicans approach gun violence, or at least how John's laid it out, that we're simultaneously saying things like the FBI was incompetent, they were incapable of following up anything, they couldn't seem to do their job right, but we also want to increase the power of the FBI and then give them the ability to follow up on everybody and do their job better. It's always like both sides of the mouth, you know, like the GOP is destroying Trump at every step of the way, but Trump is also in control of the GOP and he can do whatever he wants. The swamp is destroying Donald Trump all the time, but next time he's going to hire the right people. The Democrats are, you know, opposed to him, so he can't do anything, but on these issues, they would actually be fundamentally aligned. Like, nothing actually makes sense. There's a reason why at the end of the day, there's no policies listed. There's nothing that's actually talked about in concrete terms. It's all just like fantastic delusion.
We can take one more pithy question, and then we've got to go into the closing statements from our speakers.
Yep. This question's solely for Mr. Doyle. Sorry, this is not a very topical question. Good evening, Mr. Doyle. Someone recently, RFK Jr., who has been very vocal about the problems with American health, has thrown his weight behind Trump and may end up getting a cabinet position. How else do you believe that Donald Trump can benefit the health of Americans, especially young Americans like myself?
I think that a lot of what RFK is very positive. I think that the 2 biggest issues that we're going to face are immigration and health, because both of those are controlling for who is in the country and the quality of the people. I mean, I think that fundamentally body, soul, and mind are very intertwined. And I don't want to cast stones here, but there's a reason that you look at the people who are the most fanatically left-wing, the Antifa mugshots. They sort of have a look about them. I think there's a reason for that. They're hormonally maladjusted. It's for a lot of different reasons. I mean, male testosterone is obviously decreasing. You've got pesticides, you've got fertilizers, poisons in our clothing, which is why you need to go to Undertac and buy their underwear, by the way. It's the best stuff ever. They don't use that stuff. But you can ban the use of those things, which would make people less sick. And if you have people that are less sick, they're going to be just better adjusted in general, and I think that you will see those effects manifest throughout society. I mean, there's a reason why you look at old footage of Americans in the 70s, 80s, or whatever. They look happier. They don't look so dreary. Now you have people who are drugged up on prescription medication. They can't get through the day without taking their I don't know, Adderall or Xanax or whatever these people are into. The country is sick. Everyone seems to understand that it's going in the wrong direction, but no one except for RFK, and thank God Trump for bringing him on board, are actually addressing that issue, the health of Americans. You had Michelle Obama who got in and she was like, okay, we're going to ban fat kids, no more Mountain Dew, and it's like, well, that obviously didn't do anything. So there has to be a fundamental conversation about what we are putting into the food, how it's packaged, how it's processed, and only RFK has been willing to meaningfully address that. So God bless him for that.
Rebuttal. Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. We want to go into the closing statement, so we are not done yet, folks. We're going to kick it over to John for his closing statement. These are only 3 minutes. John, thank you very much. The floor is all yours for your closing.
Yeah, I would just say that the president, as the executive, is presiding over the sort of archipelago of bureaucracies. When we talk about the deep state or the swamp, these are very romantic terms. What that means is all of the thousands of unelected bureaucrats who do not leave their position depending upon who is in charge of being the enforcer of those laws. Under Trump, he's not as able to command them. Under Biden, under Kamala, they're more easily able to mobilize these people because they are more in alignment with how the establishment functions. And so a Trump FBI is going to function differently in 2016 than a Biden FBI functions in 2020. Simply because the bureaucrats who are occupying those positions, who are appointed by certain presidents, they understand how the game is played. And so when Trump is talking about Schedule F, constitutional, firing those bureaucrats and bringing in loyalists so that he can have a mechanically functional administration like every other president has before him, that is something that is good, and that is something that will have better results for him in his second administration. So yes, it is different. That is precisely why. In terms of policy success, again, I'm less interested in policy than I am in what is actually going on in the country. Republican, like 101, is we want less government. We don't want to pass policy. We want government to get out of the way. That is something that can happen under a Trump administration. So I don't think that passing policy necessarily is what measures a successful presidential administration so much as how happy and how provided for the people are by the incumbent administration. And again, every election is a referendum on that incumbent administration. People right now are not very happy with Joe Biden, not very happy with Kamala Harris. And I think that you're seeing Trump's unpopularity go down. People are expressing more sentiment positively for him. Because of that, they're understanding that TDS is not necessarily a death sentence and that they can eventually support Donald Trump, which is sort of what's happening. And so, yeah, you notice as we continued our discussion this evening, a lot of it was about Republican conspiracy theories, delusions, et cetera, et cetera. It hasn't been accounted for why, under the Biden administration, so many of these horrible things have been happening. It's been about what Trump did, what Trump may do, what he may not do, but there's simply no answer for what has gone on under the Biden administration, which, if you support Kamala Harris, you are voting for an extension of that. You are looking at what happened under Donald Trump, and you are looking at what happened under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and you are saying a continuation of this is a closer approximation of what I want the world to look like than a continuation of what Donald Trump was able to do. And I think that that is just simply delusional, and I don't support that at all, and I don't understand how you can be an American patriot and support that. American patriots are down bad. We are less wealthy. We are in a more dangerous situation. We are talking about mass amnesty. We are talking about billions and billions of dollars to all these other countries. We have problems here. We can solve those problems, but you simply need somebody who is willing to do it. Donald Trump has been the only political figure in any of our lifetime who has been willing to actually challenge those orthodoxies, and he's done so successfully to a certain extent, and I look forward to seeing how he's able to complete the job in a second administration, given that he will have loyalists staffing his administration, which do exist, and which are going to make big, beautiful things happen. So I think we should all support Donald Trump.
Thank you very much for that closing. We'll kick it over to Stephen for his closing as well. Stephen, the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
You ever feel like your head is spinning after listening to a conservative talk? Sometimes it's good to just take a deep breath, take a step back, and do a reality check. Why would somebody say people are hormonally maladjusted and they're all sorts of drugs when they're a conservative? Go onto Tinder, walk out on the streets, go to any large blue city, and then go to any rural area. When you go to the rural areas, what do you see? A whole bunch of fat fucks on insulin because they're obese and they have type 2 diabetes. If you want to talk about people that are unhealthy, that are on drugs, that are reliant on big pharma to survive, it's conservatives. The idea that somehow it's some college girl who cut her wrist and now she's on a little bit of Xanax is destroying the country, but not these people that are getting older, that are fatter, that are destroying our entire economy because of how much it costs to keep them alive. For every single year, another toe falls off, another increase of their prescription happens for whatever more insulin medication they need. It's just the idea that a conservative would attack our medications and say that this is somehow the fault of liberals, when conservative old people are some of the largest consumers of everything in the country. There's a reason why there's a net transfer from the successful blue states, that are powered by blue industry, over to the less successful red states that are powered by God knows what these days. It's just delusion. I think that the entire conservative apparatus, honestly, I think John said it really well earlier when he said, we're not happy about things right now, therefore Trump. I think that a lot of the Republican support for Trump right now just comes from a lack of understanding about anything. So for instance, when Doyle says, all these people are allowed to appoint people, but they can't get rid of people when they come in as a new administrator. That's not true. If you appoint somebody, you can fire that person. That's part of the appointment power of the president. These bureaucrats, the reason why they stay there is because every time you swap the government, you're not going to hire and fire, 10,000, 100,000, however many people you need to restaff the entire executive branch of the government. It's delusional. The main reason why people don't like the bureaucrats on the Trump side is because these people do have an institutional bias, and that bias is towards the existence of and the perseverance of the United States. Just look at Donald Trump trying to circumvent the results of the last election. Who were the people that stood in front of him? It was largely bureaucrats. It was people like Pat Cipollone, or it was people in the DOJ like Rosen or like Donahue, or it was White House lawyers like Eric Hirschman and Steve Engel. It was the bureaucrats. It was the people that had the institutional knowledge, that had the appreciation for the United States. As Doyle said, they don't get paid a ton of money, and they're generally just there because they appreciate the country. Even when you look at people like William Barr, who historically was known for wanting to see the executive branch expanded in power, with the president specifically, Barr quit because he was so disgusted at Donald Trump trying to weaponize his department with just a couple weeks to go before the election, or not even before the election, I'm sorry, before the certification of the vote. So when you hear conservatives say things like, I don't like bureaucrats, I don't like the way the government's working, all of that is a smokescreen for, I want Donald Trump to be an authoritarian dictator. That's it. Even when they say things like, we just want government to get out of the way, that's not true. What did we hear all the arguments made for in favor of tonight? We like the fact that government is going to ban trans stuff. We like the fact that the government is going to ban abortion. We like the fact that they're going to crack down harder on BLM riots, that the FBI is going to expand their power, they're going to go after people that might be school shooters, and we're going to get pesticides and additives out of food, and we're going to do all these things to prosecute political. This is all expansions of power of government. Republicans stand for nothing. I hate Donald Trump.
Thank you very much. I'm going to keep it very pithy, and then I'm going to give it over to Sean for his final thank yous. But I want to say thank you very much, folks. It's been a true pleasure to be with you tonight. And if you're watching live, hit that subscribe button for more.